Hey guys, welcome back to the Scarnati Swim Podcast. I'm your host, Nikki Scarnati, certified self-rescue swim instructor and strokes instructor. And on this podcast, we talk about water safety, drowning prevention, and safety and lessons. How's everybody doing this week? Have we signed up for our swim lessons? We talked about that in last week's episode. Sign up for your swim lessons. On this week's episode of the Scarnati Swim Podcast, I want to talk about medical clearance and why it's so important to have for swim lessons, right? Because there's so many aspects to swim lessons that is benefited when you keep the medical aspect in mind. What do I mean by that? Well, anyone that's signed up for ISR lessons know that you have to pay an additional registration fee that goes straight to ISR to cover medical clearance and approval to start lessons. That fee does not go to your swim instructor. It goes to ISR as a company to pay the medical professionals overseeing your medical survey and registration approval. This team of medical professionals also have the training to be instructors, so they know what aspects of the medical field applies to lessons, and that's what they're looking for in that survey. So if you have a child that has frequent ear infections, environmental allergies, food allergies, or heart conditions, seizure disorders, you name it, that's why we have the registration that we do. And I have a lot of parents that get frustrated when they're told they have to pay an additional registration fee. However, it does make all the difference, and our training reflects the medical aspect. So, for starters, we are trained to keep an eye out for abdominal distension. Is that? Well, abdominal distension is a process that a child goes through that they will, in the process of establishing breath control or in between submersions, they digest air as if it were food. So they hold air, gas, in their belly. Now, the more gas they hold, the more distended they get. So as an instructor, we're going to make sure that your child burps frequently in lessons. If they don't burp, we discontinue the lesson. Why is that? Well, because when a child hits max capacity, they become a volcano. Everything comes out. That's also why we have a 1 and 2 hour rule, because anything that's in the stomach is going to get brought up with the air. So it's important to keep in mind that it's never okay to continue a lesson when a child is not burping. Why do I say that? Because I have families that have attended other swim programs that the instructor kind of sticks their finger in to allow the air to escape out. Here's the thing, medical aspect in mind, right? Whenever you go to the dentist, the person working on your mouth, are they wearing gloves? Yeah. We don't want to stick raw fingers in children's mouths. It's unsanitary. Let's not do that. Let's not do that. Let's just make sure that they get up the air organically. And if they don't, then we're going to send them on their way, give them a chance to recover, and we're going to try again the next day, because a child's safety is always going to be the number one priority. It's never going to be the lesson length. And I have had parents say, hey, like, you're not doing a full 10-minute lesson, because it's not warranted. Sometimes a shorter lesson is going to benefit the child in the long run than pushing them beyond their limits just to get to 10 minutes. And a lot of parents say, well, it's only 10 minutes, until you attend a 10-minute lesson and you see how much work gets done in that 10 minutes. So please understand that we're medically we keep the medical aspect in mind for lessons. Another reason we do the medical background check, I'm just going to go through a whole bunch of examples just to provide some clarity so parents understand and appreciate why there is a registration process and why we take that into consideration. Let's say your child has a peanut allergy or a shellfish allergy. Well, when we consume foods, it comes out in the oils of our skin, right? So if you have a child that's allergic to nuts, the oil, if I'm eating nuts and the child is allergic to nuts, when I'm teaching, the oils are coming out of my skin and the components of the nuts is coming out in the oil. So that means that the oil is going to be sitting on top of the water. If your child is that highly allergic to the nut products that I'd been consuming, you're at risk of anaphylactic shock or body rashes, blisters, any kind of side effect from cross contamination would happen because I'm consuming nuts and your child is allergic to nuts. So, our safety protocols, we're going to make sure that your child is the first student of the day because our pool has been circulating, being filtered for the past few hours. We're also going to make sure that we go nut free for the duration of that session. And we're going to make sure that the parent brings an EpiPen to every single lesson. Heaven forbid something gets overlooked, we have the EpiPen. And ISR also has an EpiPen form that has to be filled out every day. That's for the parent and the instructor to sign off that the EpiPen was present at the time of the lessons. Why do we do this? Does it seem over the top? Of course, but your child's safety will never have to be in question. There's no way there's no plausible deniability that the EpiPen wasn't present because 2 adults are required to be accountable to make sure it's there. Why? For the child's safety, because the child's safety is always going to be the priority, right? So that's just for a peanut allergy. We have safety protocols for environmental allergies. They have safety protocols for seizure disorders, heart conditions. Sometimes your specialists, your doctors will be required to communicate with the ISR team so we can clarify and make sure for certain that no safety protocols are going unnoticed. Now, imagine if your child had a medical condition that any of these protocols apply to, and that instructor doesn't have the knowledge to keep that in mind during lessons. In my opinion, that's scary. Now, again, you have tons of medical programs out there that do not do a medical background check. But with ISR, we pride ourselves in being able to tailor a lesson specifically for that child, not just for curriculum, but for protocols. No lesson is going to be the same for one student and another student. Everything is adjusted and tailored for that child based on what they need, both skill wise and medical wise. So that's kind of why we have the registration process. Again, there's so many aspects that could be at play. We also have additional protocols for if a child gets sick. They shouldn't be swimming if they've had a fever in the past 48 hours. And I see a lot of parents treat it as if it's daycare to say, oh, they had a fever last night, but they're fine. Here's why we have that protocol. So if your child is running warm or running a fever and us not knowing it, that water is going to be considerably colder than what their feverish temperature is, and it could trigger a febrile seizure or other side effects. There's reasons why we have these processes, right? We don't just create these rules that are over the top for no reason. It's for your child's safety and for the instructor to make sure that they're always within safe parameters during lessons. I mean, we go through the process of interviewing daycares and interviewing pediatricians and making sure we do background checks on babysitters. We should be doing the same when it comes down to lessons. And when water's involved, why wouldn't you want the medical aspect in mind? Yes, it's an added cost, but to ensure your child's safety. Let's just keep that in mind. And again, I can't speak for any other company. I can only speak for ISR simply because that's how I'm trained. I'm duly certified, but I only have one certification in self rescue. My WSI covers 6 months and up, and they do not do medical background checks. And I don't know that I would feel comfortable giving one on one lessons within a self rescue capacity of high frequency and lessons without that medical background check. That's just my feelings as an instructor, and knowing enough about the field and how the medical aspect is applied to lessons. Now, if you are in a program that is not ISR, just I would ask about medical background checks. Do you want to know if there's any medical conditions? There are adapted aquatic instructors out there that may not necessarily ask for a medical background check, but they will communicate to the parent about the child's special needs because they're trained. Adapted aquatics instructors are trained to work with children or individuals that have special needs. That's their education is honed in on that, and they're qualified to do that because it's a part of their training. So just keep that in mind when signing up for lessons. If your child has some medical conditions or medical protocols, I would always consider a program that takes the medical aspect in mind, because it just ensures your child's safety, and it just gets your instructor more involved based on what they need medically. So again, not every program is going to be the same, but you would want the instructor to want to fill themselves in on what your child needs medically. And again, could it be over the top? Yeah. But when it comes down to child safety, do you really want to take the risk? As an instructor, I don't. As a parent, I don't. So, and I'm covering all this in a podcast episode because I get a lot of kickback from parents where I'll charge a deposit to hold the time slot, and then they have to pay the registration fee before starting lessons. And I understand that sometimes it's an inconvenience, but again, it's for the sake of your child. Your instructor is charging you a deposit for the schedule because parents frequently back out or make excuses on why they can't move forward with lessons. And that's wasted our time. That's a time slot that we can no longer fill because you're dropping out of it. So we held that slot for you when we could have put someone else in that slot. And when you drop out last minute, we can't fill that slot. And sometimes instructors have students on wait lists, or we have scholarship students that could really use those slots. So that's something to keep in mind too. Try not to get frustrated when it comes down to an instructor charging deposits for a session. It's to ensure that their time is accounted for. Our time is just as valuable as yours. We're not going to sign you up for a session, take your money, and then leave you hanging. And if you do, you better call the Better Business Bureau and let someone know, because that shouldn't happen. The reason why we collect the deposits is to ensure that parents are going to show up for lessons, because parents have to be held accountable just like we need to be held accountable when it comes down to safety. And I understand that's frustrating for some people, but hairdressers do it. They charge you a cancellation fee. We just charge you a deposit. Same thing with, barbers, massage therapists. Any trade worker is more than likely either going to charge you a deposit or charge you a cancellation fee if you don't show up. And I will tell you, the unfortunate part of being a swim instructor is that parents don't show up. They will literally communicate with you up until the point or a couple days before lessons are supposed to start, and they will completely stop responding. Same thing with booking refreshers. They'll book it, and then when it comes down time to do the lessons, they would just rather not reply to you and pretend like you never communicated than just communicating why they couldn't do it in the first place. And as instructors, we're fairly understanding. If you let us know ahead of time, we'll fix it for you. Sometimes I'll even transfer that deposit over to another session, so you don't have to pay another deposit. You just have to be upfront and honest with me and give me time, because my time, again, is just as valuable as yours. So that's kind of altogether why I've had parents not enroll for lessons because I said you have to do the registration, and they're like, well, I don't want to do it. I said, well, then you're not going to swim with me, because unfortunately my liability insurance only covers me and my student who has been approved through the ISR registration process. I can't just take a student and say, you have to pay a registration fee and you don't let swim. If anything happens with that student that didn't register, I'm held liable because my insurance doesn't cover that student. So again, there's a reason why we do everything that we do. And the reason why I'm putting these topics out on the podcast is to A, educate parents, B, open the floor for communication, and C, be able to, help out others who need it. Again, or just educate. Everything that I do is for education purposes. I want parents to understand why we do what we do. I married a man who always asks questions. I am a rule follower. If you tell me not to do something, I'm not going to do it because you've told me not to do it. And I trust that there's a reason. My husband wants to know every reason. So when I got into this field, I was already prepared to ask the questions because he had already asked them, if that makes sense. So I'm always open to answering questions, taking a look at someone's situation and giving you feedback. I will talk until the cows come home to help parents understand, because it just means kids are safer. So that's why I find it important to have medical background checks on students in self-rescue. Now, strokes is a little bit different because the skills are already established. We're just developing and honing in on stroke skills. Children who start strokes lessons already have a little bit of a swim. They have a 2 to 3 second swim, if not more. So that's already established. Breath control is already established. That's why I said follow the ladder of aquatics. Start with parent and me classes, get a child acclimated, then do self-rescue lessons, establish the float, the swim, and the rollback, and the flip over, and then move on to strokes, so they can access their stroke positions better. And now they know how to float, they know how to swim. That part's already established. Now we're going to address the effective kicking, the rotary breathing, and the arm movements. So everything is interconnected. But for strokes, the skills have already been established, right? So I don't really need medical background on those students. Also, these students have already gone through the ISR program with me, but again, they're older, skills are established, not as much is at play. Now you're in the field of underwater hypoxic blackout, making sure that they're not swimming for too long, making sure that they're not hyperventilating underwater, all that stuff. So again, each area of aquatics has their own needs, and in self-rescue, you need that medical background check. And again, if your child doesn't have any safety protocols, that's great. We still have safety protocols we have to follow, even if they don't have safety protocols. We have prompts and procedures. So again, everything is just interconnected. Please don't get frustrated with your instructor for asking you to register through a program for medical background. It's for your child's safety. We don't get a penny of that. At least for ISR, we don't get that cost. ISR gets that cost to cover the medical professionals looking at it. So just kind of breaking everything down, going into things a little bit more to explain. But yeah, try not to get frustrated with your instructor. Everything we do is for a reason. We try not to bother you or inconvenience you any more than necessary. We just need you to be on board with us wanting your child to be safe. And we don't want to see any child get hurt. That's just it. So that's going to be it for this week's episode. Please leave questions down in the comments. I will gladly interact and answer your questions. And if I can't answer your question, I'll find someone who can. So, all right, guys, I'll see you next week. Remember, podcasts drop every Wednesday at noon. And follow us on social media, join Swim Safe Community, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.